Brews and Banter Podcast. What up? Welcome to Brews and Banter Podcast. I'm your host, Rob G. And with me, as always, is the Legendary Brew Crew. What up, fellas?
I got water, I got, juice or whatever. It's like, y'all need twin legs? Matter of fact, I do.
To everybody is,
does Delaware have an actual culture?
This is the podcast that we talk about beer, but we also talk about a lot of things that's happening in the world, politics, movies, anything really that comes to our mind while we're here sampling these brews. Grab a drink and pull up a chair.
I went too hard on myself. You won't need nobody else. I went too hard on myself. I swear.
Before we start, I just want to say rest in peace to PNB Rock, as well as they lost a frat brother here, over the weekend as well from our chapter. So cancer is crazy, but I know everybody knows that PNB Rock was tragically struck down on a robbery in California. But I don't want to get too somber. So what up? Welcome to Bruising Banter Podcast, where the topic is the rockin' and the brew. Well, that'll be the fuel, and I'm your host, Rob G. And with me, as always, the Legendary Brew Crew. What's going on, fellas?
Hey.
What up?
What's going on, everyone?
Hi.
How y'all doing today?
All right.
Oh, great, man.
This is episode 179 of Bruising Banter Podcast. If this is your first time with us, welcome. If it's your returning guest, if you're a returning listener, thank you for rocking with us for these last 179 episodes. Actually, probably a little more if you count the other joints out there.
Side shows.
Mm-hmm.
The side shows and the special things. But we do have a special guest with us this evening or this afternoon or this morning, whenever you're listening, whenever you're watching.
Like it. Right.
Not this evening, though. This evening?
This evening. How about evening?
Not this evening.
We have Michael Stein from the Lost Lagers. If you're not familiar, it is a beverage consultant, a beer historian. That's what he is, and he'll go tell us a lot more about what Lost Lagers does. So, without further ado, I'm going to bring in Mike to the podcast as soon as I find my stream button.
All right.
Welcome, Mike.
Thank you so much for having me. So just by way of introduction, I'll say, so my name is Michael Stein. I am a beer historian. My beverage research firm is Lost Lagers. The whole idea behind Lost Lagers is that history can be dry and boring, but we like to make it, bubbly, wet, effervescent, and interesting. And I have to say, I was just telling Rob before the show, I just hit that subscribe button to the podcast. Y'all really get into history. There's no shortage of history throughout the 179 episodes. So I am super pumped to be here with y'all today. Good looking out.
Nice.
We're making history today. Cheers. You're a part of that.
But before we get into all of it, we always like to know what we are drinking on. So, what are we drinking today? We always start with our guest. So, Mike, what are you drinking on today?
Yes, I am drinking Tailwagger by Joyhound Beer Company. Joyhound Beer Company is a baby brewery, 2 years old. I think that's right. Don't quote me on that. But it is a Black-owned brewery out of Maryland. I spent some time interviewing Alfred Rotimi, who is the owner. So he's a contract brewer, and his beers are coming out of Maryland. This one was brewed by PSA, which is short for the Pratt Street Ale House. which is no longer on Pratt Street, still in Baltimore. But yeah, it's wild. So like 10 years ago, the DMV, so I'm in the DC metro area, we didn't have any black-owned breweries, and now we've got half a dozen. I think 5 contract brew, 1 brick and mortar with Patuxent Brewing Company out of I think it's Maryland. So we've got 3 in the district, and then a bunch more coming online. So it's an exciting time for beer growth for small and independent brewers, in the DC metro Baltimore area.
There's one right here.
What's everybody else? There you go.
Sankofa.
Sankofa, my buddies Kofi and Amato. Good group of people running Sankofa Beer Company. Yeah, man.
All right, what you drinking on? That thing looks good.
That's not beer. That's not beer.
It's that sweet tooth I had today. So I went to so I got me a smoothie.
Okay.
Well, you can see that smoothie from Imprint. They're known for their smoothie beers. This is a mango peach sour. Well, I guess that's what you would call them, sours. But this is very thick, right?
Yeah,
very, very.
It's like you gotta put it through the dishwasher like twice.
The cup,
don't
let that sit in your glass. Right? Don't let that marinate.
That immediately.
It's like crazy thick, but of course it's real. It's real mango-ish. I don't really taste. I don't know how you can do like peach and mango and be successful with making them taste like both.
Yeah, how you can distinguish the flavors?
Yeah,
it's kind of similar a little bit.
Because
it's like a mango is like a tropical peach.
Yeah, you should just pick one or the other. But either way, they're good fruit. So I mean, either way, it tastes good to me. So, I always pass me another one of these.
So just for the people that don't know, they put real like a real fruit is real puree or is it fresh fruit? Like how do you know?
I think it's pure. I want to say it's puree.
It is puree.
I want to say, if I remember correctly,
it's gotta be. That's
but look at this. Look at this.
That's like
they go hard, man. It's like normal people put like 5 pounds per gallon. They put like 20.
Look at this. Look at this. At the end. Look at this.
Look at this. Look at this.
All like this.
Look at this.
Look at that. Look at that.
Will somebody look at this? Will somebody look at this?
Look at this.
That thing thick, boy. Thick. You know just how I like it.
Okay.
Okay.
Peach. Yep. It is tropical peaches. International.
What are you drinking on, Lou?
Today I have Iron Hill Brewery. They are local to Delaware, but they brewed out of Exton, PA. This is the Pogue Champ Kettle Sour. You guys see all that stuff that's going on in there? Let me turn it all the way around.
Like a cat.
It is a cat. He's playing like he's playing poker or something. He got chips in this chips over there. Yeah, it's a lot going on. Pogue Champ Kettle Sour. It's a sour, guys. It has flavors of passion fruit, guava, and orange. I smell grapefruit. I was expecting grapefruit, but it don't taste like grapefruit. It tastes like a tampered down sour. You know how you got all the fruit forward and flavors, but it don't hit you in the back of your neck.
Okay.
With the sour tartness. You know what I mean? It's
is it sweet?
It's mellow. It's sweet, but it's more mellow than the sours that we're used to. You know what I mean? So I think that's where the kettle part comes from. I'm not sure, but I'm gonna just guess and say that I'm right. But this is what it looks like in the glass. Yellow, like almost like grapefruit, but passion fruit and orange. Yeah, and it tastes delicious, guys. So pass me another. I really like this. Does anybody know? I know Iron Hill Brewery has a lot of different restaurants, but do they brew at every restaurant, right?
Yeah, I'm almost certain they do.
Yeah.
So when it says brewed at this particular, it'll say it is specific to that restaurant. Then okay, thank you. Guys.
I had like a Mexican like lemongrass like lager or something, but it wasn't from a Iron Hill Brewery local. Where did I even get that from? But
I wonder if they make specific, if they're specific, like
PA.
The head brewers at the specific brewery, specific restaurants make different beer. You know what I mean?
I think so.
I wonder if they're all on the same page with. I don't know.
Yeah. Yep.
We'll get Iron Hill on here and see. I did reach out to him, so
hey coming soon.
Listen.
There you go.
That's nice. That's nice. Yes, yes.
All right, Dad, what you drinking on?
I am drinking on a collab brew. I am drinking on the Maximum Duplicity Golden Oatmeal Stout. This collab is from Mac Brewing and Human Robot. I made it to Philly yesterday for a festival and ran into Dave Mack and got a chance to sample it for the first time. He told me, you guys had already sampled it and tasted it at the beer festival at Barrel and Flow. So I was definitely ready to crack a can. He gave me one cold right out of the cooler, and I took my other 4-pack, back to the car. But this is coming in at 11.5%. For our listeners, our viewers, Dave Mack is a independent or home brewer. So he doesn't have a brick and mortar, but he's out of, I think he's from West Philly. I think.
Just say Philly.
Philly. And Human Robot is in Jenkintown, I believe. So two great brewing companies, and the artwork just happened to also meet the artist there yesterday that did the artwork. Tame Arts, he was there. So if you see the can is decorated with some good Philly art on there, you see the love symbol or the love art right here. You got the bridge in the background. I think that's the Walt Whitman. Or Ben Franklin. That's Ben Franklin.
Is it the Ben Franklin?
That's Ben Franklin. The blue one.
You could say whatever one you want.
Thank the Commodore.
That won't be Philly.
Is that the Betsy Ross? I don't know. The Tacony Palmyra.
And they known for the pretzels, Philly pretzels. So they got a little bit of everything. The artwork is dope. But
ain't no cheesesteak on there.
I might have
why? They're not known for the cheesesteak.
But not known for the cheese.
But as everyone knows, the stouts are known to be very dark. But because this is a golden stout, you're getting that syrupy brown look. It reminds you of like a triple. That's the look of it. But Dave Mack doesn't play when it comes to the ABV, and this is considered low for him at the 11.5. So pass me another.
So I have a question for you, Dev.
Yes.
How
you laughing already?
Where you get that glass from? What you want to
tell me? Hey, it was gifted. It was gifted to me.
That glass. That thing is huge. Boy.
You like it? I was gonna go bigger, but I downsized.
You got a bigger glass?
No, your hand looks so small.
Look, right. Lou wasn't even paying attention. He was looking at the TV when I first came with this huge glass.
Hell, you had your big giant goblet.
But I downsized because it was gonna swallow the beer up. The 16-ounce can wouldn't even have looked right in the glass I had earlier. Yeah, so I downsized to this one. But shout out to my good neighbor next door, Jason, who lived in Germany for a while. He bought this glass back and from Germany, and he gave me this joint. So
it looked like the little flower from the Saints.
Yeah, a little bit.
Little medieval. But if you can see like the writing on the front, you see it says this is a real this is a real Tripel.
So that's
caramel
out of there. You're supposed to drink Tripel.
How do you say that? How do you say it, Mark?
Yeah.
Mike, I know you know it.
Triple Carmelite.
Carmelite.
And so it's like French. It's Belgian, right? So Triple Carmelite is a beer brewed in Belgium, but it's funky in Belgium because they speak Belgian, then they speak French, then they have like Flanders, which is it's like a mashup of the two. Triple Carmelite. And that is the fleur de lis on that glass. So that glass is intended for a beer that's like hella carbonated, where you have like that much beer and poking out at the top, it's just all foam. They used to come. I don't know, Triple Carmelite. I think they might have got bought out by AB InBev or Heineken or somebody, but they used to cork and cage, and in those champagne bottles, they get to like over 3.5 PSI, and that joint is just like you pour a little bit and it's like champagne,
all head. Got it.
Nice.
Getting into the history already.
Yeah, that was
already.
Dope.
Yes, sir.
Hey, Rob G.
Yes, sir.
What are you drinking on this week?
I'm drinking on from Human Robot as well. Since I was there this weekend, I have the 10 Hoagie There it is.
Nice.
It's supposed to look like the wrapper of a hoagie, but it is.
That can ain't got nothing on it.
Yeah. It's
That's
hard
fresh.
to see on the
That's
side.
fresh off.
It's
Oh,
like,
I see.
I see.
I'll have to see the wrapper.
Oh,
Okay.
like the little crumple.
And that's like tape.
That's the
tape.
tape showing that shit hoagie.
Okay.
Yeah.
I
But
get it. I get
It
it.
is a 4% ABV.
This is sub though.
American light lager. There it is, right there.
Look at that.
In my human robot glass as well. Not the one I got from yesterday. Yesterday was a massive,
Huge.
Is it as thick as that one? Their glasses seem like you could throw them against the wall and they won't break.
Yes, as thick as that. As thick as it, but,
Let alone
but 4 times
head.
bigger. It's 4 times bigger, but as thick. It's 4 times bigger, but as thick. So they were actually trying to hold up those that they had the Stein holding competitions yesterday with beer, and I was like, I didn't know where I could do that, but y'all got it. But this is American Light Lager. It has American grown Pils malts, as well as non-GMO corn for
It's
this
corn.
thing. Yeah, so it's actually delicious. Everything, I mean, pretty much everything I've had from Human Robot has been a great beer. So without further ado, I'm gonna have to say, pass me another for this as well.
And that's a good beer to sip on all day. The ABV of it, it's a light lager. You know,
that's what they say. It's a good tailgating
doing.
beer. It's a good tailgating
Nice.
beer. It is football Sunday when we're recording, so it actually all comes together. We have
all
lost
comes together.
lagers on here, so I said, let me give you a lager.
As we regularly
Wait, but it's
say,
a lost. If it's a lost lager, is it a lager?
Yeah. Well, you know that is the thing. But I'm gonna tell you this about corn.
Pilsner.
We like to say, praise the maize, don't scorn the corn. Which is a controversial opinion, believe it or not. I have a good buddy who owns City State Brewing here in DC, and he's just like, no, corn needs to go. I'll never use corn. That's his opinion. I respect his opinion. Shout out to James Werner over at City State, but you know, we love corn at Lost Lagers. We're all about it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice.
You like
Did they
corn
get
too?
that corn from Delaware?
I don't know.
Oh, good question.
Delaware is a
the
big
stat.
producer of corn.
I was gonna say the stat is wild. Like out of 100% of corn grown in the U.S., only like 5 or 10% is edible, like for food. Majority of corn production, right? Like it's pretty wild to think about, right? Like let's say there's 100 million pounds grown and only like what 500,000. I'm bad at math, but yeah, you get the idea.
Yeah,
you get the idea, right? Out of 25 corn stalks grown, only 5 of them are eaten. Right?
Yeah, that's crazy.
Should be
That's
less.
crazy.
Yeah.
You don't like corn?
Corn is gross, man. Unless it's on tortilla, unless it's hot.
I just had corn up in my
on the cob,
burrito,
cream,
boy, under my
cream
taco
the
bowl.
corn, like, ew.
I just had
Corn
it.
is amazing.
Everybody likes
corn has no nutritional value.
A lot of things don't have nutritional value.
Right.
Yeah, you know, it's a
Weed don't have
it's-
nutritional
it's a
value.
great- what does it? And look, it does a lot more things than corn does to you, though. Like at least it got THC in it and CBD in it. Corn don't have nothing. Nothing.
Nobody to make you some
You
weed
eat a bunch of corn and pee, and they won't know. They won't know you ate no corn. Goddamn.
Yeah, but that young man would disagree with you. He says corn.
Oh yeah, he made a whole song out of it. That song is dope though. Like, and the way he praised corn, it made me want to take a bite, but I passed.
Yes,
I will
corn is
pass
great.
every time. I like corn tortillas. I like popcorn.
Not
I like
the
everything
actual-
but the
Yeah,
actual current. Like, ugh.
Not even corn on the cob, like
No,
grilled
I'll take
or
like one bite of corn on the cob like a year, and I spit that out. It looks delicious.
One
Like
bite
that
a
salt
year.
and pepper, the butter, it looks so good, man. It's trash.
What do you
It's
say? I have my
Mexican,
front-
Mexican
have my
corn on the
front
cob is amazing.
No.
All right, we're talking about corn. We want to know about.
I didn't mean to.
No,
fire
look,
up.
free flowing took us down the rabbit hole. We talked about corn. We here for about 2.5 minutes.
And little Tariq
More like 5.
loving corn, bro. That was amazing. That was really good.
Well, we do want to get a little more into the who Lost Lagers are, how they come together, and what made them want to even actually research beer and be all in the nooks and cranny of this was first brewed in 1754 or
Right.
earlier probably. But
Yeah, I'll tell you all about it. So basically starts in DC back in. So I first moved to DC. I'm originally from New York. I moved to DC in 2006.
Okay.
And the DC Homebrewers Club had just started. And so I joined that, and I met a lot of like-minded folks who were making beer at home. You know, they lived in the district proper. They lived in Arlington. They lived in Bethesda, Silver Spring. They lived all the way out in Gaithersburg, but they came down for our meetings. And, you know, folks that live in the district proper had like, you know, a couple hundred square feet. How do I make wonderful beer in a couple hundred square feet? And that was the subject of the meeting, right? Like, I don't have a backyard. I don't have room for a kegerator. Like, it was home brewing. So out of the DC Homebrewers Club, I met my colleague, Pete Jones, and Pete and I together are Lost Lagers. But basically, we started brewing old recipes and realizing that some things just don't translate. Like, you know, let's say it was 2010 and we wanted to brew a beer from 100 years ago from 1910. There was a lot of corn in beer in 1910. And so we started messing around with corn, with flake corn. We had, you know, corn, like you were talking about the processes, right? Like, we love, you might not like corn, but you like tortilla chips, or you might not like corn, but you love a taco, right? Right. So it gets processed, and it's been processed in the US forever, right? Like pre colonialism, right? It's something that's always been here. But on the Lost Lagers, yeah, it was basically just like out of home brewing, a real interest in history. And then once we started to do it, we would serve our beer to commercial brewers. In DC, we have about a dozen brewers right now, but back then there were probably only like 5 or 6. And, you know, we brewed a batch of beer. Often we'd have DC homebrewer meetings at commercial breweries, or we'd have them at apartments in people's homes, but we'd take our homebrew, you know, to the bar, to happy hour, and basically just get people interested. I think every brewer, whatever sort of operation they're running, contract brewer, small brewer, has an interest in history. And yeah, I mean, it's pretty fascinating stuff. You know, beer history is American history. Obviously, you all know, I'm preaching to the choir, like Black history is American history, and Black history is beer history, right? I feel like I've seen that on a shirt at
I just had it on last episode.
Yeah.
Drought season.
From
drought season.
Yeah. And so that's the whole point, right? Like, we've been fed lies about beer history, which is, oh, George Washington brewed beer. And it was like, okay, yes, George Washington does have a recipe, but like, who was in the kitchen at Mount Vernon? And it was Hercules. Right. Okay. Thomas Jefferson made beer. Okay. But who was in the cellar? Who actually was overseeing fermentation? Hemmings, you know, and basically, like, we all know George Washington's name. We all know Thomas Jefferson's name, but we don't know Hercules' name. We don't know Peter or James Hemmings' names. And the Hemmings brothers are fascinating because, you know, they're the first chef de cuisine, presidential chef de cuisine in American history. And so today, that's kind of the new mission of Lost Lagers, outside of just making historic beer, is to right the wrongs of the historical record. And that work is every day, you know, like
you'll be working forever, sir.
Sure.
That's what I'm saying. Like, that mission statement will never grow old, you know.
Right.
So that's in a nutshell the work of Lost Lagers. We wanted to do 50 beers, 50 Lost Lagers and or extinct ales, you know, the concept of bringing things back, in 50 states, you know, in the district, in Puerto Rico. Obviously, COVID kind of put a damper on that a couple of years ago, but we're getting there. We're up to like 20. I think we have 20 states, and we've been doing it basically for like 7. I would say, actually, I guess 2013 was the first one, and we formed around 2013, 14, 15. So we've been at it for a while now. You know, we're not so crazy or wonderfully passionate that we want to own a brewery. We don't want to be brewery owners in whatever shape it is. Shout out to all the brewery owners. We love you in every form. But we just like making beer. and chopping up history, and so that's kind of the pocket that we stay in.
I mean, it would be a dope brewery, though. I would be a dope brewery where you have lost
right.
The 1910 lager. Wow,
that's kind of a brewery concept.
It is definitely.
So, I should say about 1910, we brewed a 1910 beer. The brewer at Human Robot is a gentleman by the name of Andrew Foss. And he used to be the head brewer at St. Benjamin in Philly, which closed. But we brewed a beer with him at St. Benjamin before they closed shop. So we have a weird back channel connection with Human Robot there with Mr. Foss. But the beer world is small like that, you know. And I think for me, that's kind of the interest. The part about labor history is like, I don't necessarily want to know the brewery history. I want to know who made the beer there, and then where did they come from.
Right.
And in doing that, you get at the true essence. Like, there's a wonderful food writer. His name's Michael Twitty. And I just saw him in DC a couple of weeks ago. He's got a new book out, Kosher Soul. And his whole thing was like, I think, you know, brewing in the United States really should be accredited to, you know, enslaved Africans, enslaved people who took West African knowledge of how to turn fruit and grain into alcohol so that it would preserve, right? Like if you think about harvesting anything, barley or persimmons or grapes or apples, like fermentation, it's about preservation, right? Like this apple's gonna rot in a week, but if I press it and ferment this juice, I've got cider. I got a barrel of cider for a whole year. You know, like, and I think so much of American history has been whitewashed, right? Like we know that, that's very clear. So what really happened? And that's kind of more like along the lines of the work that Pete and I have been engaging in more recently. Like, what are we going to do to write the historical record? What historic truths have we found that people just don't know? And there's so much of it.
Well, is there one in particular that's really blew your mind? Like, oh, this is crazy. I could never.
I mean, as far as black-owned breweries go, we think the first one now is in the 60s. And this is like, we're just working on this. I found out that there was a gentleman, contract brewery, who owned a brewery. The beer was produced in New Jersey in the 1960s. And so that predates everything. Like, and then in the one newspaper article we found, which the newspaper articles dated the 1960s, it says that he and his wife were co-owners. It's called Colony House Brewing. And if that's the case, that means that black brewery ownership goes to the 1960s, which is a good, like, several decades, in some cases, before the first black-owned commercial brewery post-prohibition. The other one I'll hit you with is porter. So Philly is a big city. At least historically, it's been called the first city for lager beer, 1840, and for porter, 1770s, let's call it. There's a British beer historian, Martin Cornell, and he uncovered a brewery in Virginia. Excuse me, and they were brewing porter in Virginia before the 1770s, so we're talking colonial era. And of course, they were growing barley on the plantation. This is in Marlborough County, Virginia, or Marlborough, Virginia. And so, of course, black hands grew the barley to brew America's first porter until we find a porter before the 1760s, right? So it's like, of course, beer history is black history. Of course, black history is American history. But some people have been so indoctrinated, and, you know, I've committed these sins against history as well before knowing what I didn't know, right? You don't know what you don't know until you learn it. But you have to be a humble person and be like, all right, I don't know everything. I don't have the whole record. Let me reconcile that. Give me the truth with a capital T, no matter how it makes me feel. Let's get into it. And that's like the hard work of public history, which is the greater scope. You know, beer is public history. It's all public history.
Right. I think if a lot of people took that approach, we'd be a lot better. We'd be a lot
nice and
further
easy.
along in terms of.
That's for sure.
Right.
We got
Outside
to
of beer.
we got to take all the information, good and the bad,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
take it, digest it, and see how we can move forward together
And be productive with it.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now you said you started the you said you got about 20 beers that you've done so far. Is that about 20 beers that you've done so far? Have you done Delaware yet? Have you gotten to Delaware?
Yeah, was it 20 states?
No.
Is it 20
And
specific states in
It's
beers?
20 states. Yeah,
So
exactly.
how do
Delaware is the first state. Like,
Absolutely. What are you
It is.
doing? What are you doing?
How is that?
What's
So
going on?
I'll give you. I was sitting on my ass for the last 2 years. That's but so we're about to brew a beer with Key Brewing next week. Key Brewing's in Dundalk, Maryland, and one of their brewers, Derek Davis, used to make beer at a brew pub in Delaware. So I did give him some recipes and some consultation on some corn beer, but we didn't release it as a Lost Lagers. Like, he didn't can it. Our name wasn't on the draft list. Like, I consult with people all the time. And that's kind of what's wild about Lost Lagers. Like, if I were to chalk up everybody that I gave a recipe to, we'd be way over 20. But the whole idea is like, hey, can you pay us? And the answer is usually like, well, see, the thing is, and we're like, all right, well, can we put our name on the can? And then if it's like, yeah, it's like, all right, let's do it. But that's the thing about Lost Lagers. So Pete, my colleague, is a professional historian. He works for a law firm. They provide, expert legal services and history and gathering information. So he's a researcher. And so because of him, we've done some projects where we're billing at like $100 an hour. And then we're doing other projects where I'm shelling out $100 an hour of my fucking time. You know what I'm saying? Because we believe in the project so much.
Right.
That's the whole thing about this beer industry. Like, any of those contract brewers, like, if they're breaking even, that's huge.
Right.
So, like, I know how hard so many people that don't own a brick and mortar brewery have to work, because cans are crazy pricey, and they don't want printed cans. They need stickered cans because they got 4 batches coming down the tank, and they need to split it 4 ways, right? Like, the bigger you are, the easier it is to get money, right? We all know you got to spend money to make money. So of course the AB InBevs, Heineken's, Miller Coors, Molson Coors of the world, they drop it. They don't even pick it up. They're making money so fast. You know what I mean? Like, whereas every last penny counts when you're a tiny brewer. And I think, like, looking at American history, like, let's just focus on Sam Adams, like Boston Beer Company. There's a brewery that started as a contract brewer, and still today has a lot of contracts throughout the Northeast, Pennsylvania, Ohio, right? It's Boston beer, but they're making beer in Ohio. They're making beer in Pennsylvania. Like, what if some of these small contract brewers right now in 30 years are America's biggest brewers, right? And that's like the 30-year plan. Like, when I was working on the piece, so I write outside of beer history, I write for Washington City paper. And I wrote this article, The Collective, which is all about these Black-owned breweries in DC, Maryland, and Virginia. And Sean Taylor, who owns Black Viking, his goal is to be the first nationally distributed Black-owned brewery in the US, which is a wonderful goal, because it's like, aim for the, shoot for the sky. If you fall, land on a cloud. Like, what if he's not nationally? What if he only gets 48 states? That's amazing, like, and that kind of big, like, 30-year vision is the kind of shit that moves me personally. And then to go back into history, like 100 years ago, and see people talking about 30-year plans in like 1910, 1920, that to me is like connecting the dots between today and, because we tend to think of people in the past, it's totally normal to be like, well, they weren't that smart. They didn't know. They, like, what did they really know? Were they really that intelligent? And it's like, yeah, like, absolutely they were. And you do a disservice to the, to the people in the historical record when you kind of shrink it down. But that's just the way the human brain works, right? Like, we have to box it in to keep it all, organized.
So when y'all are doing these beers, are y'all naming these beers based off the history that you guys found? Like, because I don't know what the name of the beers are. So what's the
so I'll give you the St. Benjamin example when they were in Philly. So we called it 1911 lager, and we were like, oh, it's a lager brewed in Philadelphia in 1911. Like, let's go. It's the most straightforward thing, right? And then sure enough, there's a cider, I think it's a cider company with 1911. And so the owner of St. Benjamin was like, hey, we're calling it this, but we just got to cease and desist so we can never make this beer with the same name again. We were like, oh, and I don't know if they brewed a second batch. If they did, it was, like American pre-prohibition corn lager or American pre-prohibition lager. So something pretty generic. We do it totally depends on who we're working with. Some people are very comfortable giving us creative control. Other brewers just take it upon themselves. Like there was a beer at Firestone Walker, who's a massive brewery. They have the Propagator in California. I think it's San Diego, or maybe it's no. It's like it's further north in San Diego in California, but it's a brew pub. So all the beer brewed at the Propagator stays in the. So I wrote an article like I think it was called like America's Founding Lagers, and that was in Craft Beer and Brewing. And the head brewer at the Propagator took the recipe, scaled it up, and just brewed it. And it was like, I think it was like 1947 Bach. So I love when people will just take the year and just drop it in.
Yeah.
There's a brewery in Texas that makes pre-war pills. So it's the Live Oak Brewing Company, and they make wonderful lagers in Texas. And we hit them with a 1912, 1915 recipe. And they had found that in Texas, even though this beer was brewed in it's either Philly or Baltimore in 1915-ish, they were like, oh, in Texas, they had pre-war strength. Like when beer, so prohibition, right? Like the selling and buying of alcohol from 1920 to 1933, they found via local history in Texas that all these breweries wanted to make beer at 5% ABV, and they called it pre-war strength. So they were like, oh, we're going to take from this 1930s, 40s marketing, pre-war pills, and just brew this beer to 5% ABV. And so, yeah, like the titles are honestly, I'm boring. I'm a nerd. So I like titles that are boring, there's been like, we brewed a Bach with a local brewery, Denizens, and it's kind of like American Bach. So, when you have German Bach from like Bavaria, or even like Bach, that's brewed in Austria or the Czech Republic, it tends to be like 6, 7, 8%. American Bach was brewed at like 4 to 5% ABV. So it's really like a style American Bach. Basically, nobody makes it anymore, save like Shiner Bach, right? When you have, and people have Shiner Bach every day. It's huge in Texas. It's almost distributed nationally. Like that beer's like 4.2, 4.8%. So, the styles get interpreted throughout the history. It's kind of like, so my buddy Jamal Lemon was on, and he was talking about, like Gullah Geechee cuisine and how it's similar to West African cuisine, right? Like when we look at foodways, it's the same thing with beer. We Americans have this concept of like, here's food and here's beer. But like elsewhere in the world, in Africa and Germany, like all the other continents, it's like
one thing.
Beer and food. And so people are picking up on that, right, with like fruited beers and things like that. But it's just interesting to see how foreign concepts were interpreted by American brewers, and then how they were going to funnel that to the drinking public and have a sellable, marketable product that people would buy.
What made y'all want to, or unless I missed it somewhere, what made you want to look back into the history of
that's fair.
That is fair, because I was going to add to what you're going to ask, Yoda. I was reading his bio on the Lost Lagers website, right? And it was saying how when he got his master's in fine arts, he was doing this. He made the focus of his thesis was, beer, right, and history. So dive back into that a little bit, because that's where he was definitely going with it. Like, how did you decide to make that your thesis?
That's a great point. So back in 2010, I was working in Northern Virginia, but taking classes at American University. Okay. And American University was crazy pricey, and I was like, this is ridiculous. So I was looking at UMD and George Mason, all the state schools, and George Mason had a great writing program. So I was like, all right, let me go to Mason. And when I dug into the research, I uncovered Peter Hemmings and James Hemmings at Monticello. And I was like, oh, I think James Hemmings is the first black brewer, the first commercial brewer, because, you know, Jefferson at Monticello had some bartering going on. And it's like, all right, if you were selling beer outright or you had beer in kind sales, wouldn't that make Hemmings the first black commercial brewer? And everybody from the history department was like, whoa, slow your roll. Like, you can't say anybody is the first until you've done like years of research.
Right.
And then you have to be like, I think he's the first because XYZ, I could be wrong. Right. And that was really helpful too. So this is back in 2013, 2012, 11. I left DC, gone to George Mason. So it was always, you know, beer history, black history, home brewing history, beer in DC, Maryland, Virginia. Like, these were the concepts that, and so when I finished my thesis in 2013, that essay was in there, and then I was writing about family and health and fermentation, and basically like just questions, just asking questions, you know. So it's kind of personal. People tend to take religious personal. I'm Judeo-Christian, right? Like, my dad comes from a Jewish family. My dad was born in Prague in the Czech Republic. My mom was born in the Northeast. So like Catholic family, Jewish family, like I'm a mashup, you know? And some Catholics take issue with you're Catholic or you're not. Some Jews take issue with you're Jewish or you're not, right? But like, I am what I am. And so to me, my thesis was about that. And I think that's kind of part of what I had presented, what public history had presented me all along, which was all these contradictions. Like, Hemmings eventually bought his freedom, but died, right? But he died in freedom. And so that's a great thing. But it's terrible because, you know, like American chattel slavery, like what a fucked up institution that is, right? Like, my grandfather, my dad's dad, survived the Holocaust, right? And we say like 6 million people died in the Holocaust. Well, in the transatlantic slave trade, we're talking about 11 million. But like, is it the Depression Olympics? Like, we're not, like, I'm not trying to talk about, you know what I'm saying? Like, you can't reconcile. Like, I think this is totally out of left field, but I think back to Chappelle's show with the race draft, and they're like, oh, the Wu-Tang Clan goes to, like, that skit is hilarious because it shrinks down race and identity to like such a simple, right? Like, oh, Tiger Woods goes, and it's Chappelle and what's his face, Neil, whatever, the writers, they're poking fun of race and identity, right? And I feel like all of history to me is identity. And then within public history, it's like, what can really be said about identity and what can go through it? So getting back to the original question, the whole reason to dive into like beer history was public history, beer history, and then family history. Like, they're all connected to me. They're all linked. But you know, as far as brewing beer, like, people don't want to show up at the brew pub, at the bar, at the restaurant, and be like, "Yo, let's talk about the Holocaust. Let's talk about the transatlantic slave trade." They're like, "No, I want a cold beer." Like, "Oh, it's brewed in 1910. That's cool." Like, and so you meet people where they're at, and you give them little breadcrumbs.
Those are very specific bars that you go to that have those topics.
It's one night a week, and the bartender's like, "What? I'm not making anything." Like, these motherfuckers talk all the time.
Right. I love it. I love it.
What unless you had that brewery yourself, then you can
listen. Yeah, you can do whatever you want.
And then people that come there know what to expect because they know.
Every Wednesday night we talk about slavery, and on Thursday we talk about the Holocaust.
Here you go.
Come if you like.
What a lineup! Trivia on Monday.
Drink your misery here.
Pressure Wednesdays and Thursdays. So there's so many different brews and beers from the past. Like, what makes you guys grab onto the recipe and say, hey, we want to try to brew this one, or we want to give this to a brewery? I know there's thousands, probably millions of different recipes out there. So what catches you guys' eye to make you want to brew that beer?
That's a great question. So sometimes it's fully recipe driven. Like we have a brewer out in Virginia, a little west of us, who's like, I want to find something from Virginia, from like the first lager brewed up until Prohibition. So we're talking like 1800s to 1920. So we're trying to find for him that needle in the haystack. And that's like one way to look at the historic record, right? And then like, all right, is it in the Virginia Public Library? Is it in the, like, you know, Loudoun County? Like, is the Loudoun County Historical Society, do they have it? And then if there's nothing there, it's like, hey, man, we spent all these hours. Here's what we have from New York, Philly, Baltimore, 1860, 1880, 1910. Will one of these work, right? Like working it that way, because we now have like a library of them. Sometimes it's like, hey, you're really good at making lager. Like, what do you do well? And then let's fit a historic recipe to your style right now. And then if they have the ability, like corn, always comes back to corn, if they can cook corn at 180 Fahrenheit and keep one vessel at 180 or boiling, right, like 200 over 200 Fahrenheit, like, can we then transfer that? Or is that just impossible? There's no way they can heat their mash up, or a vessel that we would use like a rice cooker to keep constant temperature. So it kind of goes both ways on the spectrum. Sometimes like, hey, I want a recipe. Sometimes like, I want to work with you. What do you got? And then when that's the case, we're like, well, what do you do well? What sells well for you? What is, what's your best seller? How is it, you know, historically accurate? How is it unlike anything? Like, you know, just in the last like 10, 20 years, we've seen the movement away from like really bitter. So like IPA is still like king of the roost, right? Like IPA still sells the best for independent small craft brewers. That's the biggest segment. And it's kind of like just thinking about that. And then the movement away like 10 years ago, let's say 2012, the IPAs were really bitter. Now we have a ton of New England hazy IPA. It's not bitter at all. In fact, it's quite sweet.
Yeah.
And then you had over the last 5 years the proliferation of like pastry stouts, beer with vanilla, beer with cacao, beer with honey, cinnamon, date syrup, whatever. Like it was like the palate sometimes moves in. Nobody was like, hey, I want coffee, chocolate, vanilla, cinnamon in my stout. They were just like, oh, I'm taxed on bitter beer. Like I'm maxed out. I don't want more bitter beer. Give me something sweet. And that's like, then all of a sudden we go in the other direction. So, you know, in terms of recipes, like they're ancient. I mean, I've been talking American history, like local craft beer, at least, you know, nationally. But beer goes back to the ancient Egyptians, ancient Mesopotamians. It's funny. I have a friend who's an archaeologist, and just last year, he wrote an article that beer was 11,000 years old. And then there were new findings from Rockafet Cave. Yeah, well, first of all, grasp that 11,000 years ago, like what the fuck was on the earth? 11,000, like nothing that we had.
None of this equipment.
Nope, computer, nope, keyboard, nope. Like a house with fucking like
doors and
nothing.
It wasn't even know they didn't even know what a shutter was, Devin.
Right.
They shuttered during the thunderstorms. That's what they did.
But actually brings me to a question similar to similar to that in terms of, has there been a recipe that you try to do and you are impressed with the ingenuity of the brewer? Like, oh my goodness, we can't recreate this, or it was difficult to reproduce because of ingenuity, because of you were like, they didn't have any of the techniques. I mean, they didn't have any of the equipment that we had now. So how do they do this?
Yeah, for sure. Honestly, a lot of it is around lagers. People want to do pre-prohibition lagers, but they can't heat their mash. They can't boil corn grits in their mash. Or they can, but they can't find, you know, let's say it's like a 20 barrel system and they need like 1,000 pounds of corn grits. And nobody can get it because all of their suppliers, you know, Brewer Supply Group, BSI, what is it? Brewing Science Institute for Yeast, like they can't get them what they need. Like, yo, I'm brewing this 2 weeks from today. It's like, well, nah, like that's not going to work. So yeah, it happens actually all the time. And then it's up to us to find workarounds. Like, how are we going how are we gonna make this work? Because that's
like
the other
find
thing.
like an
too,
alternate. You're talking like you'll find an alternate of what could go into like the corn, to make
like
the
a
corn
modern
grits or
day,
whatever.
like a modern day corn grit.
Yeah, because that's what I was
Exactly.
wondering. Like,
Yeah.
how is it that you find recipes that still have the ingredients that exist today? Because like
it's probably half of the
old,
ingredients. Like, what is this?
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
you probably got to research what that ingredient actually was on top of.
Exactly.
The recipe. Yeah.
Exactly, and that's food history.
Yeah,
Something
right.
to do.
Right.
And then what is food history? Agronomics. The farmer stopped growing it because he didn't get paid for it
Right.
anymore. Like,
Right.
you know what I'm saying?
Sorghum.
So, that's a great example.
Yeah, no one eats sorghum anymore.
Like nobody fucks with molasses. Like corn syrup came in, and they were like, "All right, done.
Fuck
Hit
this
the
molasses.
showers,
Yeah.
molasses."
Give me that. Give me that K row.
That's what I'm saying.
Give me that
K
K
row.
row.
And it was easier to work with. They're like, this shit has chunks in it. The syrup is liquid. I don't have to filter.
It's either
I can
clear
blow my
or the
strainer
brown.
out.
Yep.
It's all about functionality, 100%. So it's funny you ask that because there's actually more recipes where we don't have what we need if we do know what the ingredient is. Or like even with hops. Today we're obsessed with hops. We got, Chinook and Mount Hood and Citra on the can, or Calypso and Crystal and Amarillo, whatever. Like back then it was like early hop, late hop, and we saw that we were like, what the fuck, early, late, like what?
We didn't have all these.
That must be the growth
names for this stuff. Right.
These is little rotten.
It's the growth span. Like this we picked these early. These
are young. These halfway rotten. These hops are halfway rotten. Take these.
Got the mighty right. When you go back, you think of that like what?
Late hops.
Just translated. Congratulations. You just translated
there it is.
An 1880 recipe. Well done. Like for real. That's how it is. And it's
so like now is there like an early Citra hop or a late Citra hop?
It could be depending on
because it feels like if you pick a particular hop earlier or harvest it a little bit later, it would change the flavor, right? Of the hop, wouldn't it?
Yep. Yeah, so
or probably the longer that you keep it,
like you pick a peach off the tree, you eat it right away. It's not as good as if you let it sit for a day or two. You know what I mean? Like
or it might be sweeter or something.
Or it gets sweeter later. Yeah, absolutely.
You're just talking process, right? You're just talking harvest. Okay, you're gonna pick this peach either June 15th or August 15th.
Right.
Okay, so early would be June 15th, late would be August 15th. What are you going to do with that peach? You're just eating it out of hand? You're going to bake a pie? You make a peach wine? Like, what's your
difference?
What's your end goal? It's a legitimate question. And then the thing with hops, though, is because they're all dried, how big is the bed that you're drying them over the heat?
So
how long
distribution, all of that.
Yeah. There's a second step. We're just talking harvest. Are we going to pick on June 15th or August 15th?
Right.
Are we going to harvest them at 80 degrees or 16?
Right. Exactly. So, and then there's that second step of processing. Like, with the hops, how long are we going to dry them for? How hot is it going to be? And this is research that's happening at Oregon State University right now. I just listened to a Master Brewers Association of America podcast where Dr. Tom Shellhammer had one of his students collect data, right? Because Oregon is a massive hop grower and they produce, and they were doing it on the duration, like how long, and the temperature, time and temperature. How hot was the kiln when they were drying, and how long were they drying it for? And then they did a study, like, can you tell the difference if the heat is lower and they're dried for less time? And basically the findings were like, you couldn't tell. So why would I spend, if I'm a hop farmer, and then I got to dry these before I bring them to market, why would I spend 10 hours if I only need 8?
Right.
And that's the
Cut
growth.
down the time.
There you go. Time is money. That's agronomics. So and I mean, beer history is rooted in that, like, and that's kind of what's crazy too. We have all these leads on, like, farm labor is, to this day, to me, the one of the most underrated labors, right? Like, every time you buy blueberries, or you go to Giant or Safeway or fucking Wegmans, right? You get some fancy berries. You're paying like $5 a pop, right? Same thing at the farmer's market. But like, people actually pick, like, if you go out and you pick blueberries, like, that shit is exhausting.
Yeah.
And so like on some level, I'm like, fucking $5 a pint? What the fuck? But on the next level, when I'm like, I
ain't going out there and picking that shit.
5 hours doing it, and all I got is 16 ounces. Like,
right.
You know?
I can pay for that. I'm gonna pay for that thing in the store.
Look, in 5 hours, I done went to the store, bought the blueberries, cooked the blueberries, ate the blueberries, shit the blueberries,
and went to sleep, took a nap,
and took a nap. I'll pay $5 for blueberries. I went apple picking a couple weeks ago. It was so freaking hot, and I only had a bucket. Like I just had like a tiny bucket full of apples. I was like, oh my god,
does that all day?
Yeah, I'm like,
all day.
And I think I paid more than he made. I think I paid to pick the apples more than he would have made to pick all the apples.
So that's a good business venture for the orchard owner, right? Like I'm going to open it up. People are going to come, they pick apples, and I make more than if I had to, get up early, get them to market. Farmers markets goes from 8 to 12, right? There's just selling. That's not. So like.
And you don't got to transport them. They came and got them. You drove out there, paid me, and went and got them.
Right.
Yeah.
There you go.
Come apple pick. It's so much fun. Like,
so, Mike, how often, because you're usually in the research and historical mind frame when you're recreating recipes, how often do you get to take that hat off when you go to a brewery that has I guess you would say historical that you haven't worked with, right? That has maybe like this historical naming of a beer or at least ingredients of a beer. Like, is it hard for you not to pick it apart? Is it hard for you to just take it for what it is? Yeah. Like I'm an artist on the fine arts of like performing arts side. So I look at music and can dissect. So I'm wondering from your aspect, when you think of beer, like how do you turn that off and on when you're going into just normal patron civilian into a brewery?
I'm a terrible dude to go to the brewery. You do not like if I'm in Philly, we're having backyard beers, man. So we can just rap and I don't have to pick the shit apart. Like
right.
because really, like, it's all fucked because public history is
right.
Everybody's got a claim, but every time you turn the TV on, you're not hearing about, my ancestors, Jews in Czech beer. You're not hearing Michael Twitty's ancestors, Virginia, African Americans and Black folks in Virginia that made persimmon beer, that made peach wine, that made that shit is not out there. It's not in the public sphere. Now it's public history and it's real and it really happened. So when I go to the brewery and it's like, Berliner Weisse was a style brewed in Berlin and yada yada. It's like, yes, but right. So for me, it's always like the yes and I know, if I'm chafing people, if I'm an agitative. Right? I'm just
you walk in like,
why you busting my balls? Oh, he here to bust my balls.
Here he go. I just wanted to drink the beer. He about to
he about to empty the brewery. Everybody here to exit.
I've been talking for half an hour. My beer's not cold anymore. It's and I think so. I of course temper myself when I come to situations like that, but I think the best part is getting a receptive audience when it's like, hey, you're here for beer history. You're here for American history, Virginia history, whatever. Like, and then knowing people come with an open mind to really be like, all right, let's get blown away. Like, I'm always looking for the next writer, blogger, podcaster that's going to blow me away. They're going to serve me up some history I've never heard, which is like, shout out to you for having like KJ on. Jamal and I have done this with our writing. We're still trying to do that. Like, you tune in to Black Food Fact, like your mind's about to be blown, right? Like every time it's
now I'm hitting him up on a regular, like, yo, look at this spot I found. Look, you've been here, like it's addictive.
It's contagious. He's
exactly.
So passionate that his passion spreads, and you're like, yo, all right, Friday.
I'm looking for it now. Right. Yeah, last Thursday I found myself. I was at a social event at the Fiddler Club, and we were all talking amongst each other, and BYOBs and stuff were on a topic of discussion, and then we started we got into that, and then the black-owned BYOBs and finding them within Philly, and it just takes you, like I said, on this journey of looking and finding stuff.
That's it. It's absolutely a journey, and I think that was part of it too. Like, you know, I am a terrible guest at the brewery, but if you have somebody who's willing to be like, this is why I love. So, you know, the split with brewing that I see in the food world is like front of house, back of house, right? And the maitre d' and the people that are going to sit you front of house, like it's all smiles all the time, right? But in the kitchen, it's like, get the fuck, like hospital, right? Like, and it's chaos. It's absolutely chaos, right? Like mise en place, you got your shit in place. And that's how it is in brewing too. Front of house is like sales. Like, I catch more flies with honey than vinegar, right? So I'm going to smile on your face, even though I completely disagree with you, because I need you to buy 5 kegs from me so I can get my spot bonus next month, right? Like, it's like that with sales. In production, it's like, oh, what the fuck? Like, these fucking carpet walkers, right? Like, they have names. Like, it's hilarious. There's a
carpet walker.
Look,
that's what it is. Like, really, like, you know, in sales is front of house, and production, beer production is back of house. And that's and I've always found myself gravitating towards folks in the back of the house, because that's the truth. It's like, oh, you love this fruit beer? Core these apricots for me. I'm gonna spend the next 7 hours cutting pits out of apricots, and I'm gonna spend 1 hour putting them in a tank. Like, grab a knife, help me out. You know what I mean? Like, and that's really how it is. And there's always been that breakdown between, like, I hate to relate beer making to sausage making, but like how the sausage is made. Nobody wants to see how the sausage. Everybody loves a platter, right? You got knackwurst and weisswurst, and you got your bratwurst, but like nobody wants to see that pig being slaughtered, right? Like, that's what it is. That's really how it is in brewing. Like, and every, you know, and I was swept in back in 2006, like, oh, Anheuser-Busch is bad, and like, how dare they, and this, that, and the other. But like, the benefits you get as an Anheuser-Busch brewer, like full medical, full dental, you get vision, you get paid time off. Like, nobody's doing, I mean, yeah, like maybe Boston Beer and Sierra Nevada are doing that in craft beer, but like, and that's labor, and labor doesn't give a fuck what you think about the brand. It's you know, like labor history, like people really get passionate about it, as they should. Like, you know, we had Labor Day, what 2 weekends ago, last weekend, whatever that was, like
2 weeks ago.
Yeah. And it's just interesting to think too, like what is labor? What does it mean, right? Like, who's getting paid? Like, and then getting credit outside of just labor. I think that's getting back to beer history. Like, who's getting credit? And the Hemmings brothers absolutely do not get the credit. We went to see Hamilton last night at the Kennedy Center, right? Which is like, I love Lin-Manuel Miranda. He's just some dude from the Bronx. Being a New Yorker, I have lots of friends from the Bronx. Love it. Absolutely. Like, but that whole show is, you know, it's new mythologizing. Some is correct history setting, some is off, but it's just like, I love it. It's wonderful, right? Like, in musical theater, in jazz, in hip hop, whatever the genre, like, it's just good to be there. Just be in the audience, taking in the art, you know, like, that's wonderful. Then you can sit back and pick it apart. And I feel like that's kind of the mission of Lost Lagers too. Because people in a day-to-day, like, you're going into the brewery, you're going into the sales meeting, it's just business day in, day out. But if you can take a step back and think about it, like, it's really, you're part of like a long history. Right? Like,
I remember this has to be over at least 12 years ago, maybe even 15. I was at a sales conference in Minnesota, and I was in the polyethylene, polypropylene business at the time, because the company I worked for, and the sales rep or whatever, she gave the history lesson on how before there was the modernized tubing for people to like heat their driveways and have these tankless water heaters and everything like that. And it made everyone way more interested in the presentation by her giving the story of how the Egyptians used to heat the floors back in the day before all this modernization happened. And they used to drill the holes in the floor. And then, you know, they had these like heat beds and the insulation and stuff like underneath of it so that it wouldn't actually burn them. You know what I mean? But it would still give them the heat because they were just like out, in elements and all the kind of stuff. And just that linkage.
Sidebar, that's ingenious. What you just said, that ancient history is ingenious what they were doing, but then it was so elite that I think sometimes that's how it gets lost in history because the common man had no clue what a heated floor was that even existed. And then like we don't even really know, but it's more common for us to have a heated floor or to see a heated floor, maybe not to have one in our home, but to have the heated drive. You know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah.
People is like, I don't want to do snow. I don't want to be shoveling like a whole 5-mile driveway.
Us in Delaware, like I'll shovel. I'll get the snow blower.
Exactly.
But in Minnesota, like no, bro,
Too
I
much
don't even
snow.
want to see that. I got to go to work in the morning. Like
exactly.
So that's interesting how the history is written.
Yep.
I mean,
whoever writes the history makes it different.
I never thought of the Egyptians ever once shoveling my driveway. But if I had the funds to have to just hit a button, I would absolutely be like, Osiris, hear my prayer. Like, I would like every day, right? Like, oh, the sun god has blessed me with this button. Like, that's it, man. Like beer history is that old. So this guy so Jamal and I are working on a history of Charleston, water, beer, and oysters. Okay. But I'm talking to my guy who's out in Colorado. His name's Travis Rupp. He used to work for Avery Brewing Company. He left Avery. Now he just works at UC Boulder. But he was telling me, like, he wrote this article that said beer was 11,000 years old. Sure enough, as soon as the article comes out, I think it was Oxford University's archaeology trade publication, right? Only archaeologists read it. Okay, cool, whatever. He was like, then the next year they published this piece on Rockefet Cave in Palestine or in Israel, and beer is 13,500 years old. And I was like, oh shit, did you say like beer is only 11,000 years old? And he was like, come on. He's like, I can't, of course I didn't say that. Like, because he knew that even though beer was 11,000 years old in 2021, by 2022, they pushed it back 2,500 more years because they found a cave and they found this culture, the Natufians. And the Natufians weren't hunter-gatherers. They weren't agrarian folks waiting for the Nile to flood to plant crops, right? Like the Egyptians knew, like every year the river's going to flood. And I'm going to plant my shit here. And the river's going to flood a lot, and we're going to have tons of crops, or the river won't flood a lot, and we'll just have a few agrarian products, right? Like, so he is deep in archaeology, and him breaking this down for me, my mind was just blown. Like, so now I got to put this in the piece that Jamal and I are writing, but like, it is thanks to ancient Egypt. We have all this shit. It is thanks to Africa. There's so much shit on the African continent that we Americans just don't know.
Tell them.
I mean, yeah. Like,
so I got to ask this question. Have you been to Africa or do you plan to go?
I'm planning right now, and I want to go to West Africa. So I have never been I've never stepped foot on the African continent. Okay. I think my first country is going to be either Ghana or it's going to be West Africa. I know that.
So okay. So as you say that, I have a brother, Kavan. He's planning a trip to Ghana in December. Right now, they're taking a whole study group. They're taking an actual college. I think they're taking I forget how many students to Ghana in December.
Amazing.
But they're taking the professors and everyone there. I mean, obviously, it isn't for beer, right? It's for a different lesson.
Yeah, they have a purpose. Yeah,
they have a different purpose. But who knows? Talk about it after the show. We'll see how something could manifest from it.
Let me email you to get the back channel. I'm big on the back channels, and I want to keep that open. So I'll say this about West Africa. You got the Sankofa hat. So Kofi Moreau, who is the founder of Sankofa Beer Company here in DC, small contract brewer. Kofi was raised in West Africa, Ghana, I think Benin, or maybe Amado was in Benin. But anyways, I talked to Kofi about Pito, and Pito is this, I think it's millet-based beer, right? It's a beer that's been brewed in Ghana. for hundreds of years. And he's so casual about it too. When we rap, I'm like, so is it like 500 years old or is it 1,000 years old? He's like, yeah, it could be 1,000, right? He's just cool about it because, you know, the historian in me is like, all right, well, is it 1500 or 1000 AD? Like, let's get into it. Right. And he's like, nah, it's just been a long time. And I'm like, all right, so like, what do the millet makers look like? He's like, oh, they're beautiful. I'm like, word? He's like, yeah, they're all women. I'm like, oh, okay. He's like, and this woman knows because her mom made pito.
Right.
And she knows because her mom's, so this woman who's brewing pito, you know, small, like homebrew style, not commercial, not like packaged in the grocery store. Like you have to go to the little shop to, you know, like the stand and you get it. And her grandma's been making it. And I was like, oh, did you ask them about, you know, like protein? How much protein's in the millet? Does she do a rest an hour in, you know, traditional brewing? You mash in your barley, you give it a rest, protein rest, so that, you know, you don't have like gloopy runoff into the kettle, right? Like all that. And he's like, she didn't know anything about this, but the product was good. And I was like, cool. I was like, just one product? He's like, yeah, like one product, like maybe once a year. Instead of boiling for an hour, she boils for like 3 hours. And I was like, oh, so like strong, like pito. He's like, yeah, but strong is like going from like 2% ABV to like 4% ABV. And he just really broke it down for me because I've never been to Ghana. I've never had pito, but I'm fascinated by it, right? It's a folk beer. It's like one of those things that is a long tradition continuing. And I think in whatever culture, I love ancient cultures. If there's something today in 2022 that they were doing 500, 1,000, 1,500, 2,000 years ago, I want to know about it. Like, I want to know, like, what was it like in 22 AD, right? Because that's what we keep time. And I think, like, we, like, you know, Christian Westerners, right? Because then you have the Jewish calendar, and then you have the Chinese lunar calendar. Like, once you start orienting yourself with ancient cultures, like, people kept time differently. Right. Like, right. And it's so wild to think about that too. But like tying it back to, you know, the continent of Africa, I so want to go. I so want to get there and see what's like. There's so much to learn. So I want the plug. I'm trying to collect as many plugs as possible.
Yeah,
for Ghana, Benin. I mean, I want to.
Yeah, he's lived there too before, so like many years ago. But yeah, that'd be dope to plug you guys together.
Now, do you still do the what is it? Are you still the official brew tour guide of DC Brow, or are you still the official tour guide?
I'm not. I have left DC Brow, and DC Brow is in great shape. So I worked there from, let's see, I think it was 2013 to 2020, maybe 2017 to 2020. So 5 to 7 years. But yeah, so just to orient the audience, DC Brow Brewing Company was the first production brewery in DC since 1956, right? The last brewery that made beer for grocery store shelves and restaurants and taverns, whatever. They closed in 56, and there was nothing till Brow opened in 2011. I shouldn't say nothing. There were brew pubs. There still is, like the District Chop House. Gordon Beer wrapped up shop and they were done. But sort of similar to Iron Hill, you were talking about Iron Hill at the start of the show. Iron Hill, right? Like they have one brew pub in, let's say, Newark, Delaware, or let's say they have one brew pub in, you know, Delaware. Then the next one's in, I don't know, outside of Philly and Upper Darby or wherever right? Like, so that was the concept. Those pubs only made beer for on site. And now, like, Iron Hill has grown where you can get Iron Hill cans. You know, they're made like in PA. You know, you buy them in Delaware. They're made in Pennsylvania. Like, that model didn't really translate to DC because, I mean, because is the $1 million question. But basically, the district still does more in wine and liquor sales than it does in beer sales. Like, if you look at the pie 100%, there's more wine and liquor than there is beer. Which is a bummer, but it's also a great opportunity for anybody that wants to open up shop in the district. Like, you could convert the wine and liquor drinkers. Like, are you going to be the one? You're going to take market share, right? Like,
why do they put wine and liquor together and not wine, liquor, and beer? Why isn't it all three separate?
Why isn't it just wine, liquor, and beer? Because wine and liquor will always beat beer, wouldn't it?
They are broken. You raise a good point. They are broken out. So it is wine, one bucket, liquor, second bucket, beer, third bucket. Yeah. I'm just saying, writ large, for everything that's not beer. And also cider, cider falls under wine. You pay a wine tax as a apple wine maker, right? Like, so I'm just saying, like,
is it because it's fruit and not like a grain?
Yes,
because
fruit based.
Okay, because it's still you still brew cider, right? Like that's still a brew in the brew family, but it's not. It's considered more wine than beer.
So yes, tax wise, it's taxed like wine. You pay, your vintners, your winery tax. But to your point, there are way more breweries, especially in the Northwest, Oregon, Washington State, even California, that make cider, right? Like if you walk into a brew pub, they're not making wine. They might have a cider on though that they themselves made. And that's because basically you press the apple juice, you get the juice from the apple, you hit it with yeast, and then you have hard cider, Actually, in the time I left DC Brau, I worked for DC's first winery since Prohibition, which is Anxo, ANXO, and they are a cider maker. So all they make is apple wine, But yeah, like it's another thing that's not beer. It's not wine. Like, how do we handle this? How do we deal with it? And then that goes back into the history too, like a barrel of cider, like hard cider, right? But like people get tripped up on it because you don't call it hard wine. It's just wine, right? So those in the cider game are like, well, you have apple juice and you have cider. And in their mind, all cider is alcoholic. There's no such thing as non-alcoholic cider. So it's like these terms, right? Like English is...
Wait, so apple cider is so tricky.
Oh man, English is trash. It's a trash language. Yes, I couldn't wait for you to say that. I'm on you with that.
So just regular apple cider is not a thing? Like, how people be having.
Is it alcoholic? I don't think regular apple cider is alcoholic, is it? It don't have alcohol.
Not. When you buy it from the orchard, right? You go to pick your own apples. You buy apple cider. It's just 0.0 ABV, right? But what fruit juice wants to do is turn juice into alcohol.
So the longer you hold it in a contained,
then it becomes a hard cider.
Yeah, it gets that hard on it. Get that HARD on it.
Get that hard on, bro.
Get that hard on.
Yo, but going back to what you said about the difference in the sales between beer and wine and liquor, to me that's odd because there's so many different choices of beer options out there.
And alcohol.
But then there is alcohol in
You think so though?
Like it's so many different flavors and different
no, because all of wines and
it's
a lot. I mean, it's a lot, yo.
All these styles of beers and flavors.
I'm gonna say that they compete. Like nowadays, I think they all are competing because, like Devin says, you go to a wine cellar and they'll have like the whites, and it'll be a whole room just full of like
just all of them. It's just like
then you go to the red
many variations, and it's like 100 and 200.
It's like just the Chardonnays. This is just the Chardonnay section. You're like, oh, it's like 3 more categories of whites that I ain't seen yet. Like I got to pick through 100 of Chardonnays. So like, and then when you get rum, you got all the Bacardis, and then all the Parrot Bays, and then all them shits. And then when we get to the beer, it's stouts. But they have this type of stout and the imperial stout, and this stout got pumpkin in it, and this stout got. I think they all crazy. Everybody trying to be more creative to sell and market their product. But back, like I think Mike, maybe you could answer that. Like even like 30 years ago, it seems like it wasn't that many. Like it wasn't no raspberry rum back 30 years ago. You know what I mean? Like now they're just trying anything to get you to keep coming back.
I guess they're listening to they're listening to the market too, though, right? Because if they see that so many people like they're already taking the vodka and they're mixing it with the cranberry, or they're mixing it with it. They're like,
so why would put
cranberry? Just already give it the flavor of that. You know what I mean? Let's just let them have it over ice.
Let's make it. Let's make a spritzer on top of that.
Now
we got
a whole different variation,
and we got cranberry in our vodka. Cranberry juice in the vodka already for you.
Yeah. Yeah. So the question for 30, like this is new. This hasn't been happening since, let's say, 1992, right? Which is just 30 years ago. It feels like yesterday. But, all right, 92. How much rum are we talking about? Like, there are now, I know, because there are 1,000+ distillers in the U.S., right? I know there weren't 1,000 distillers in 1992. I know there were less than that because it's grown.
Sure.
Now, I know also that I had some Parrot Bay as a young one, right? Like before I knew that rum, like I thought all rum looked like vodka. I thought it was clear. And then I come to find out that there's rum. Like, so Pete, my colleague in Lost Lagers, he's like, Mike, you gotta try this funky rum. I'm like, funky rum? Like, what are you talking about? He's like, all right, this is Jamaican single pot stilled, and it's got a little, like, it's got that little juice on it that you, and so then he just hands it to me, and what's in the glass speaks for itself. Like, it's funky rum. This is unlike anything I've ever had. Now, if you handed this to me in 2002, right, like 10 years after 1992, I would have been like, what the fuck is this? Like, this is not Parrot Bay. This is not my beloved vanilla blueberry fucking cranberry rum. Like, what? Like, get this out of here, right? Like, so the palate evolves, and I think, like, we in America, anybody born from, let's say, like, I don't know, 1970 to 1990, like, you grew up in the corn syrup generation. Like, whatever you did as a youth, there were Airheads, or there was Fun Dip, Fun Sticks, Pixies, right? Like, all that fucking candy was corn sugar. Like, we didn't know what.
The
for
best
me,
way to eat corn. It's the best way to eat corn.
There you go. Nice plug for like Mars Corp, if you're listening. Stipend.
Exactly.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. Like, that stuff, like what the real product, like I tasted Airhead watermelon before I had real watermelon, and I tasted blue raspberry Fun Dip before I knew a blueberry and a raspberry were different fruits. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
right.
And that's
shame.
happening.
That's a shame.
That's a damn shame, but it is what it is. Just New York in the 80s, right?
All that cement around you, no greenery.
Oh man, it was. Yeah. Anyways, but so here, all right.
Good.
I just cracked.
Hey, we're familiar with that.
Hey, shout out to Urban Garden. Okay, this is the only chamomile beverage, right? Like, I can't find I can find chamomile tea, right?
Right.
But there's no cider, steeped with chamomile leaves. There's no rum with. Maybe there is a rum with chamomile. My apologies if you make one. But like, this is the only chamomile product. And so when I write up Urban Garden I write for DCBeer.com, in addition to the city paper, I'm like, yo, this is a beer that tastes like beer, but it also tastes like tea. So if you really like tea and you're on the fence about beer, just try this. Because the whole idea is like getting new people, like that palate will evolve. You will come into meaning in time, right? Like the first time you ever pick up a text that's like 500, 600, 700 pages, it's probably the Bible, or it's the Old Testament, or it's the Quran, right? Like, as a child, like whatever it is, or you see the Odyssey, or you see, the Iliad, like that shit is dense, and you're never really gonna get it until you learn to read. So you have to learn to read, right? Like,
True.
You can't get the knowledge in this text until you can look at the words and be like, oh, that's a sentence. That means something. Let me figure out what that means, right? Like, it's the same thing like, we all come into it wherever we are, right? Like, some folks as a teenager, some people, 21-year-olds, whatever, but your palate at 21 is not your palate at 31, 41, 51, right? Like, it evolved.
Yeah.
So Lost Lagers, let's set the tone for us, or set the mood for us. You guys brew beer. So you guys are like a small establishment. You guys got a brick and mortar. You guys tap room. Like, give me the scene.
Yeah, so it's all contract only. We don't own a brewery.
Okay.
We don't own like in the case of Urban Garden, they have a retailer's license. In the case of Sankofa, they are retailers legally by ABRA, the Alcohol Beverage Regulatory Administration in DC. We don't own any of that. So it's all on whatever brewery we're partnering with to sell that beer.
Gotcha.
And then if they have a budget, we will gladly take a check, PayPal, Venmo, whatever you got, right? Like, we're here for it. We're here for it. So, you know, Pete's day job is a professional researcher. For me, this is it. It's all beer history all the time. I'm a freelance writer, so I'm looking for the next paid gig. Beer history then with Lost Lagers comes as a secondary gig where it's like, all right, whatever is keeping the lights on, paying the water bill, that's number one. And then all of the beer history comes second. That being said, I'm so passionate about beer history, I can't get it out of my head. So we might as well try to have an agreement with whoever we're working with that will be paid for our time, we'll be compensated. But that was it. Pete and I decided, you know, years ago that we did not want to own a brewery. That it was hard enough as it is to just maintain Lost Lagers projects without having, you know, the big project of being an entrepreneur. And I love breweries, don't get me wrong. I'm thrilled. There's over 9,000 now in the US. Like, that's amazing. But it's just, too much work for everything we have on our plates right now.
You can't consult or collab if you have your own brewery because you're doing all the recipes. Like, I feel like Lost Lagers would be the 1911 brew, the 1865 Emancipation brew, all these different breweries from past. So you can't do your collaborations. You can't consult if you have a brick and mortar. It feels like it's kind of hard to do both.
Yeah, because you'll be doing your own thing.
Yeah, like why would I give you this recipe? Right? I'm gonna brew it myself. Yeah,
it's a solitary brewing. Yeah, your company is number one, and that's it. And yeah, you might go to another brewery to collaborate. Once a year, you're going to work with somebody else for, let's say, Barrel and Flow, and that's wonderful. But for me and Pete, it's about disseminating the information, hitting up as many people. Like, we are effectively the plug. We want to get you what you need. And you never talked to this brewer in Baltimore? Oh, let me just send an email.
But
you never talked to this guy, Phil?
Like, not to cut you off, but it just made me think when you was talking, like, so when you guys consult with these breweries, like, and provide them all this information and these recipes, like, are they doing anything to display this information to their customers? Like when
the
you
history
go into
part, you mean
the history part, to their customers.
That's a great question. So for the customer immediately, if it's on the can, you'll see it on the can. Like, we work with Dynasty Brewing in Ashburn, Virginia, and it says beer recipe developed by Lost Lager in consultation with Lost Lagers. And every time you buy a bottle of Dynasty beer, we did they actually worked with Mount Vernon. You can go to Mount Vernon and buy a bottle of Dynasty. It's like, you know, the home of George Washington and Hercules and all these people that were there. Like, you will see us on the label. So then, you know, okay, Lost Lagers, like, I can hit them up, right? Like, you go to our website, contact information's right there. So it's in the marketing in some cases. In other cases, you know, this happened much more before the pandemic because, you know, draft beer, keg beer was flying off the draft lines before 2020. We might consult with somebody and not be on the packaging at all, not be on the website at all. And so why would we do that? Because we had another project coming down the pike, or because we wanted a relationship build, right? And so we're trying not to do that anymore, where it's just like, you know, free information just to better your product. But it is definitely still a passionate thing where if, like, we want to make some beer, it's just to get it made, just to get it done, right? Like, and those are kind of the two polar opposite ends of the spectrum that I struggle with. Like, I want to brew beer and I want to see this recipe made, so I'm just going to give it to you, versus like, time is money and my time is money, so I should be paid. If nothing else, I should be on the can, on the website. You link to my website so that the customer, when they buy this beer, they know this is our blood, sweat, and tears that went into this. It's something I struggle with all the time.
But I'm just thinking, like, so if I see like your information on the beer can, right, and I don't know what Lost Lagers is, like, I don't know, as as a person that just likes to drink beer, if I'm gonna go hunt for what Lost Lagers is.
Right.
And
Right.
so
But like as a person that just likes to drink beer, just to help you out, I would want to know them because most people who like to drink beer would like to know where it came from and the history of it. So like I hear what you're saying, like how besides just the name,
like I'm thinking like is there like any point where the can has like some of the history where that ingredient
presented to you by
presented to you by Lost Lager, just show me right there on the can when I grab it, because people don't get me wrong, people always read the can.
Or is it surrounded by an event? Or is it surrounded by an event where you can actually give the history
where they
of what the beer's about?
Or is there a QR code on the can? So
something like that, because I just feel like all this work and then like you giving all this history and then the customer doesn't know it. Only the actual brewery knows it.
Yeah. So the best example, last summer we did a dark lager called Kulmbacher. And so this was a style that was brewed before Prohibition, after Prohibition. We did this with Dynasty. Shout out to Fabio Garcia, who's the owner of Dynasty. But so on the side of the can, I'll just read you. You can get this on like Untapped. I'll drop a screenshot in the chat. But hoppy dark lager in the Kulmbacher style, hopped with Pearl, Tettnang, and Zatz hops, brewed with locally grown Pilsner, Vienna, and caramel and dark malts. And then underneath that, Lost Lagers, Michael Stein and Peter Jones, provides old recipes to drink makers. This Prohibition era recipe comes from a museum's archive. Check out lostlagers.com for more information.
Okay.
Right. So like it's
that's what I was
in there. I think the way you were saying it earlier, Mike, it was just like Lost Lagers helped.
Right, yeah.
And it's like I don't care.
Yeah.
Like me drinking cool name. If you say all that, then I'm like, oh, okay, let me go on and see what I need to get some.
There you go.
Cool name. Go put that can in the recycle. I'm done with it. Like,
right.
Now I'll bring this can to my desk and look at Lost Lagers.
Although a QR could even be like a little icing on the cake, could be the cherry on top, right along. And now that's like the new form of
identification. That's your business
anyway.
card. And I'm talking about Mike going to the brewery, and when they put the QR code on the can, it just comes up with your shit. It don't have nothing to say that the brewery is just your shit, and it gives all the history about that particular beer and directions to y'all's website and all that type, like what y'all collab, how y'all collab. Maybe y'all say we collab with the brewery this way, but it's basically Lost Lagers did this shit. This is our QR code.
I'm on board, man.
Yeah,
I'm in
me
favor
too.
of QR code.
10%.
I'll tell you what I hate.
10%.
Clicking on that QR, and it's the same shit that's right there on the can. Like, man, I want the backstory.
Right. It definitely gotta be more involved.
I went to the link, and now it's the same. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, so that's why
I took my time to go here, and now y'all just copied and paste. Like, give me more.
That's what I'm saying. Like, reward me. I have an interest. I sought it out.
Yeah.
So, like,
give me that granularity.
And see, that's what I'm thinking. Like, I want to be able to get that history of this style or whatever the ingredients in this, like how
why why are these guys Lost Lagers who is Lost Lagers collabing? Why did they what are they about? But like what Yoda said, if you click the QR code or you say it on the can, what you just read, like we definitely know who you guys are. So that's dope.
That's dope
for sure.
Well,
I just think there's so much information. Like, it's better just to plunk it down right on the can. And it's funny y'all brought this up. Pete and I are going on right now. Pete and I have an email thread with this Maryland brewer, and I'm like, lostlagers.com, just put it on there. And Pete's like, well, if people are interested, they'll know. So just say Michael Stein of Lost Lagers. So we're going back and forth on this right now. Like, this is
Michael Stein of lostlagers.com.
Oh, okay. There it is.
Settle.
I have to tell you, I cannot compensate you for this conversation.
Just look, a beer.
Look, no, you know what? This goes to my last question, and you can do this for us right now. We're collabing when you do the Delaware beer, but what I wanted to know is, and you can do it with the Delaware as an example with the Delaware collab. Like, how do you focus on a brewery in that particular state? And how do you give that brewery the recipe? Like, is it is it a total collaboration where the brewery comes together with you guys and says we want this, or are y'all like we're going to reach out to this brewery, they're in Delaware, we want to have them this be the Delaware state beer for Lost Loggers? How do you go about picking the brewery or whatever? Because you got 20 states, you got 21s. Look, that's the 21st state will be Delaware. We usually the first, but you know how it goes. But I'm calling it right now. Lost
they didn't
Loggers,
even start here. Like that's weird.
Right,
Like,
it's very strange. But we can get 21st. We could be the 21st one. So it could be Lost Loggers, Brews and Banter collaboration with. We know a bevy of breweries in this state. We can get you one. But how do you go about like the actual question is how is the process of picking the state brewery, matching up a beer with them, and how does that actual process go?
That's a great question. And if we're really going to workshop it, I would be like, all right, you go to a dozen breweries. Let's say, in 3 months, you visit a dozen breweries, right? Every weekend you go to another one. You're buying beer from them. You have a good relationship. I would just be like, which do you like the best? Who makes the best product? Let's go there, right? That's purely based on what's in the glass. Who's making the best beer? Let's go ask them. And then outside of that, I would
have different choices.
Right, but
there you go. Well, there's the list.
I think me and Rob might have the same.
You think so? Okay.
I think Rob and I have the same. But go ahead.
We'll talk behind. Nobody needs to know that on there.
On blast, right?
No one needs to know that on there.
It was a good. That's a good process.
Yeah.
I don't want to have the GOAT conversation of the GOAT Delaware brewery right now. Like, I'm not trying to do that, but then I'll say after that, it's like, who are you closest with? And whatever brewery you're tightest with, they're probably going to have a passion, be like, this podcast is wonderful. We want to put this podcast on our can. Let's cook it up. And then you go and you talk shop, right? Like, well, we know IPAs do really well, but our second best seller is a lager. Like, what can we do with lager? And I'll say too, we've come into it from the capitalistic mercenary side. Like, we have a story to tell. We want to be paid for this story. Let's put it in a beer. And then we blasted that out to a dozen breweries. Crickets. Just nothing, right? When you lead with like, hey, I'd love to be paid for this, it's really like, times are tough, budget's tight.
Right.
Sorry, But when you lead with it, like, I have something that you want. I have information that you've never heard before. And I have
try to
a dozen brewers.
Or...
I have the top 12 brewers selling craft lager, small independent brewers selling lager in the DC Metro. You want to know how they do it? So it depends, like, what your sales technique is too, right? Like, is it purely for the love, or is it, for the dough? And then you evaluate based on that. But I mean, for me, I would just ask you really informally, like, what's your favorite? Why? Okay, well, I'm an IPA head and I love hoppy beers, and this is the best hoppy beer in Delaware, in my humble opinion. Right? Like,
let's go here. Yeah.
Now we could talk to Mike all day, it seems, but we don't want to hold you for too much longer. But
Mike got a lot of history.
He 2 beers in. He 2 beers in.
Yeah, Mike, you need to come back within 6 months.
Yeah,
I'm here for it.
I like this history stuff.
We want to thank Mike for coming on the podcast for sure.
Yeah, definitely. Very interesting.
Lost Loggers has a lot of information and those beer styles. How about some ales and lagers and all historical things? We want to thank you for that. But before we go, we always like to know how people can find you and what Lost Loggers is all about, what their upcoming projects and all that kind of stuff. So how can people find you on these worldwide webs, these social medias, all that good stuff?
Yeah, good question. So check out lostloggers.com. We're very active on Twitter, probably the most active on Twitter, at Lost Loggers. Same thing on Instagram, at Lost Loggers. And if you give us a follow on the socials, check out the website. We got our newsletter sign up. You can sign up for the newsletter, but really just, if you follow us on the socials, you'll know the next project's coming down the pike. Like I said, Key Brewing out of Maryland, Dundalk, Maryland will be the next one. And obviously, I'm going to have to send you a few cans of that for your recommendations now.
Yeah.
Payment in kind, if you will.
Yes. Thank you, kind sir.
Yeah, fam. So Brews and Banter in the next 6 months. Tune in.
Yes.
Be back. Hope to talk to you gentlemen again.
Yes,
that's perfect.
Sir.
That's perfect.
All right, Dev.
Well, you can find me and on Instagram.
Kudo.
Are we doing? What we doing?
Yo, what's it just
got so close to the camera.
Oh, I got so close. I'm about to say you threw me off like I was in like I wasn't in sync with what's happening. You didn't like my close up.
That close up was crazy. So well, you guys can find me and blah 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 blah.
All right, go ahead. I'm sorry.
There you go. Well, once again, you can find me on Instagram at DevDrinksCraftBrew, or you can email me at devdrinkscraftbrew@brewsandbanter.com. We're about to fuck it up.
All right, yo.
You can find me on IG at IM302YODA. That's it.
All right. Lou?
My name is Lou Belgium. I'm on them Instagram.
I like it. See?
All right. And you can find Bruising Banter Podcast on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Bruising Banter Podcast. You can listen to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, anywhere you listen to podcasts. You can even say, Alexa, play Bruising Banter Podcast, because we're on Amazon Music, and you also can check us out on iHeart and Pandora. For sure. You can go to www.bruisingbanter.com and find out all that information, as well as get merch if you want to support the podcast that way. It's always good to like and subscribe and smash that like button, all that good stuff.
Smash it.
And get notified when we come live or when we drop a new episode. You can follow me, Rob G. Rob Stay Bruising. There it is. Bing, 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 bing. Want to thank Mike Stein from Lost Loggers for coming on the podcast.
My pleasure.
Until next time, this has been episode 179.
179. Whoa.
Yeah. All right. Peace.
Have a good week, everyone.
Look, JID back in the city with it. GD done been all across the globe. They say Jid is scribbler, he's silly with it when he spit it. And I hope he don't sell his soul. He should be good, man, he signed a code.